This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the legendary catalogue from one of the greatest, most iconic, and legendary bands in the history of music. And they are one of my all time favourites, and I've had the great pleasure of seeing this incredible band twice, and they were amongst some of the best shows I have ever seen in my life. They were absolutely fantastic. And this is a band that, quite frankly, needs no introduction whatsoever. They have seen it all, they have done it all, and they have been on top and remained on top for virtually their entire existence. And the band I'm talking about is, of course, one and only legendary Canadian rock band Rush. So, this edition is going to be the first of 5 parts where I'm going to be taking a look at Rush's entire catalogue of albums, which is a total of 30 albums, so that's 19 studio albums and 11 live recordings. Now, I'm not going to be talking about their entire catalogue in one go because, quite frankly, that's a very tall order and a challenge in itself. So, what I am going to be doing instead is I am going to be taking a look at each decade of Rush's albums. So, part one for today, I will be discussing all of the Rush albums from the 70s. Part 2 will be discussing all of the albums from the 80s. Part 3 will be discussing all of the albums from the 90s. Part 4 will be discussing all of the albums from the 2000s. And Part 5 will be discussing all of the official live albums. So, Rush as a band have had very few lineup changes. In fact, officially, as far as recorded lineups are concerned, there have only been 2. And the band was formed in 1968 by longtime school friends Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, and they recruited original drummer John Rutsey on board, and that became Rush. And John Rutsey was let go due to health issues, and enter the professor himself, Neil Peart, and that pretty much became the definitive and legendary Rush lineup for all of their entire existence. Now, Rush, when they first started out, they were kind of more like a traditional hard rock band, very much in the style of Cream, Thin Lizzy, The Who, and very heavily inspired by Led Zeppelin. When I first got into Rush, I didn't really hear a lot of their earlier stuff. I heard more of their later stuff from the late 80s to early 90s, and I thought they were a really good band. But once I started getting more and more into Rush's music and started delving into their catalogue, I was completely blown away by how different they sounded in their earlier years. And when I first heard their earlier stuff, I just thought, they're okay, but they just sound a bit like Canadian Zeppelin, lots of the, oh yeah, too much of the whole Robert Plant-esque kind of vocals, but the playing and the musicianship of the guys was second to none, and these guys could really, really play, but just couldn't really get on with the vocals that much. But as time went on, as they started to develop their sound more, and they started to move away from sounding like a Led Zeppelin tribute band, they just started to develop their own style, their own identity. And once I got to their later stuff, Rush really became a force to be reckoned with. So they went from being just an ordinary Led Zeppelin-esque tribute kind of band to a real monster juggernaut in their own right. And I've been a fan ever since. And as I said, I've seen them twice. Unbelievable shows and some of the best I have ever seen. So, for part one today, I am going to be taking a look at Rush's albums from the 70s. So, this side of the catalogue, as far as the 70s is concerned, as I said already, they started out as more of a classic hard rock band. And then as time went along, they became much more like a traditional progressive rock band, similar to bands like King Crimson, Genesis, Yes, and Pink Floyd, among others. And what's so mind blowing about Rush is there are only three guys in the band, and it sounds like a band of five or six guys, and that's a testament to how talented these guys are individually to create such a monster sound and make it sound really big. It's just incredible. The only other band I can think of who have achieved that sort of greatness and that sort of musicality is ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and they're the only other band I can think of who have done and achieved something like that. To have three very talented guys to come up with a massive sound like that. It takes balls to do that, and ELP and Rush I would definitely put in that category. There are other bands who have done similar things, but those two for me, they really set the standard for what a power trio is all about. So we are going to talk about each Rush album from the 70s individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. This is going to be a lot of fun, but it's very tough at the same time. Obviously, there are some albums that are better than others, but I think when you go through Rush's catalogue, there's a lot to appreciate and respect that these guys aren't afraid of trying different things. And as I said at the beginning, they are the ultimate band of musical chameleons. They can adapt to the times, they can adapt to any situation, and for the most part, they always make it work. So we're going to start with the first album, and this came out in 1974, and this is their self-titled debut album, Rush. So as I said at the beginning, this is pretty much, you know, not the Rush that we would know yet, but the early hallmarks are there, but just not quite there yet. And as I said at the beginning, this is kind of like very much in the style of Led Zeppelin, Cream, and The Who. And there's a lot of power in the music, and it's very typical of the 70s, especially that early part of the decade. But there's some great music, and there are a couple of songs here that will go on to become staples in the band's life set. So the self-titled debut album features the original Rush incarnation, Geddy Lee on vocals and bass, Alex Lifeson on guitar, and John Rutsey on drums. John Rutsey's a good drummer, pretty standard rock drummer. Think of like Bad Company sort of style of playing. I mean, he does his job very well, but as I said, there's not really much to say about his drumming. He's a pretty standard rock drummer, and he does his job very well. But the playing of Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, that would become more or less the backbone for what Rush were going to be all about. So let's have a look, shall we? Oh, wow. My, weren't we so young back then? Oh, wow. So all of the songs were written and composed by Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, with the exception of one solo contribution by Geddy Lee. And it's pretty much self-produced, and the production on this album, it's okay for what it is, but it's not as refined and polished as some of the later Rush albums would go on to be. But for 1974, it's pretty good. It's what I expect. And as I said, it's very much like Led Zeppelin, but there's some great playing. There's some great songs on here as well. So the tracks we got here are as follows. We've got Finding My Way, Need Some Love, Take a Friend, Here Again, what you're doing in the mood before and after. The music packs a punch, and there's a lot of power and a lot of pepper going on here, but there's some great material here as well. Not really an album I reach out for, but the few songs that I do like listening to, they're really good. But for me, Rush's debut album, it's okay, but it's kind of a bit of a hit and miss for me. But there's some really good songs on here. So the standout tracks for me are definitely Finding My Way, In the Mood, and Working Man. It's a really, really good, powerful song. And the rest of it is just pretty much standard rock music, but I enjoy it for what it is. But I kind of like some of the later albums from Rush, but it is their debut. You know, you can't expect things to happen straight away, but this is a band still trying to find their way, just like in the song here, Finding My Way. So they're still trying to find their footing, they're still trying to get themselves established, but it's a good, solid debut album. But as I said, it definitely got everybody talking that this was a band to watch and the potential was there. And, considering that Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson were pretty much mere boys at the time, the playing is just off the charts. Geddy Lee's vocals is just all the way up there, but it's really, really good. And his bass work is just rock solid, and Lifeson's guitar playing is just so crunchy and packs such a hell of a punch, but it's really, really good. So there you have it. Rush, the self-titled debut album. It's okay for what it is, but got to start somewhere. So good, solid start, but this was definitely a sign of things to come. And this was the only appearance of John Rutsey. As I mentioned already, he would be let go due to his health issues. So there you have it. Rush, self-titled debut album. Good start, and as I said, not really one that I reach out for often, but the good stuff that's on here more than makes up for it. Not bad. Good start. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 1975, and this one is called Fly By Night. So Fly By Night is the game-changing album, which featured the first appearance of drummer Neil Peart, who would replace John Rutsey. And unlike Rutsey, nothing against him, he was a good drummer, did his job pretty well, but he was pretty much a standard rock drummer. Neil Peart was definitely what you would call a drummer's drummer, a thinking man's musician, and he would go on to become the band's main lyricist, as he would write all of the band's lyrics for their music, and had much more bigger chops, an all-round great drummer. He could do it all and could play percussion, you know, very highly skilled guy. This was someone, there's a reason why he was called the Professor. He was very highly intelligent and very highly versatile, came up with all of the concepts for the band, and he helped turn Rush around. Rush went from being a standard rock band to a colossal monster juggernaut, and a lot of that was down to Neil Peart's contributions. And I definitely got the sense that once he joined, he really helped Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson to step their game up as far as musicians. Not saying that they didn't play well on the first album, they played great, but I got the sense that with Neil Peart, he really helped step their game up, and this would go on to become the definitive lineup for Rush for all of their existence. No lineup changes, this was the band, and unlike a lot of other bands where you had members who didn't get along or they never saw eye to eye, you never got that with Rush. You always got the sense that there was a real bond there, real tight kinship. Like they were more than just musicians; they were like a band of brothers, and it really showed in the music. And to have a band with the same group of guys for their entire run is unprecedented. It's very rare you get that. Whereas bands They're always changing lineups constantly. You never got that with Rush. Now, unlike the self-titled album, which was pretty much in the style of the rock bands of the time, Fly By Night, you could definitely get the sense that Rush were heading more towards a progressive rock kind of direction, and a lot of that was down to Neil Peart and his contributions, and his drumming definitely helped beef up the band's sound, and his drumming would go on to become one of the signature hallmarks for Rush going forward. So let's have a look, shall we? Wow, don't we look so young there? And there's all the lyrics here as well. So we got Neil Peart on drums and percussion, Geddy Lee on bass and vocals, and Alex Lifeson on guitars. And we actually start to hear Alex Lifeson playing some acoustic guitars as well, which would go on to become one of the signature hallmarks for Rush. So all of the music here is written and composed by Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, and of course all of the lyrics are written by Neil Peart. And there's also one contribution from Geddy Lee, but this is a real true band effort. So we've got Anthem, which is one of the iconic Rush songs, Best I Can, Beneath, Between and Behind, another iconic Rush song, and Baitor and the Snow Dog, which is like a little mini epic, with 3 movements, which is like over 8 minutes long. Unbelievable track, and this is where I feel that Rush were really heading into a new direction now, and it was very exciting, very different, but we was all in for it, and it was definitely like, okay, this is what they're going to be, this is what we're going to do going forward, and there's no going back now. And then we got Fly By Night, another classic, Making Memories, Rivendell, and In the End. But great collection of material, and really and truly, had Neil Peart come on the first album, we might be having a very different conversation, but everything worked out for the best. And to me, no disrespect to the self-titled debut album, it's great, but for me, this was the first real Rush album going forward, and it's a really good, strong album, and a lot better than the first album. As I said, it's pretty much of the time. So the standout tracks for me are Anthem, Beneath, Between and Behind, Baitor and the Snow Dog, and Fly By Night. Really good, strong album, and a great first outing for Neil Peart, whose drumming is all over this album and definitely has a very strong presence. And for me, I would say he became the man. He became the man of Rush, as far as I'm concerned. But that's not to say that the other two didn't play their parts. They all played their parts. And even though I always looked at Neil Peart as the man, this was a true band effort and no weak links whatsoever. Everyone really placed their parts very well. And as I said, everyone brought out the best in each other. So good, strong outing, and a much more stronger album than the self-titled debut album. So there you have it, Fly By Night, the first appearance of Neil Peart, and they are off to the races. There's no going back now. And the best part about it is Rush were just warming up. So excellent stuff here. So we move on to the next album, which also came out in 1975, and this one is called Caress of Steel. Now, Fly By Night marked the first appearance of drummer Neil Peart, so this new lineup would carry on and record and release their follow-up album. Now, this album doesn't really get a lot of love. I don't know why. I even read some reviews that this album wasn't as strong as Fly By Night, and on their documentary, they refer to the tour of this album as the Down the Tubes tour, which I think is quite hilarious. But I think this is a band still trying to find their way, still trying to find their footing, and you definitely see that Rush are taking more risks and more chances, trying out different things. And I think Caress of Steel gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I think it's a good, solid album, and there's some good stuff here. You know, there are a few tracks on here that are a bit questionable, but I think for the most part, I think Caress of Steel is a really good album. There's some really good tracks on here, I think. So let's have a look. So there's the lyrics and there's the guys, and the album cover's quite cool as well. And you know, as I said, is Caress of Steel the best Rush album? Probably not. Is it a bad album? No, I wouldn't say it is. I think it's a good, solid album. So we've got Bastille Day, which is just a great opener, and it's just classic Rush. I think I'm going bald. Yeah, not one of their best, but it's funny, but it's not one of Rush's best songs. Lakeside Park, it's a good song, a really good song. And then we've got two tracks here which are big epics. So we've got the Necromancer, which is 12 minutes long and it's made up of three movements: Into the Darkness, Under the Shadow, and Return of the Prince. And then we got another epic here, which is like almost 20 minutes long: The Fountain of Lament, which is made up of six movements: In the Valley, Didax and Narpets, No One at the Bridge, Panacea, Bacchus Plateau, and The Fountain. Some good stuff here. And Rush at this point, they were more or less like embracing the whole epic movements that progressive rock bands were putting out at the time in the 1970s. Bands like Genesis and Yes, and even King Crimson and ELP. They were doing like these great big long form epic pieces. So Rush, to their credits, were latching onto that, and I think they made it work. You know, three guys in the band to pull off epics like this, I thought they did a really good job. And as I said, Caress of Steel kind of gets unnecessary hatred. As I said, I don't understand why, but I think there's some good, strong material here. There's some great playing, and it's quite an enjoyable album. And you know, as I said, Rush were always about adapting to the times and making things work, and they definitely made it work here. As I said, is it one of their best albums? No. Is it one of their worst? Probably not either. I would say it's somewhere sits in the middle. It's not a bad album. It's not a good album. They're still finding their footing, but there's some good, strong material, I think. So, standout tracks for me are Bastille Day, Lakeside Park, The Necromancer, and The Fountain of Lament. And I think I'm Going Bald is probably the worst track on the whole album. And it's a silly name for a title, but I appreciate that the Rush were, you know, trying to, you know, poke fun a little bit and having a laugh. But I think it's a good album. I wouldn't put it as one of their best, but by no means necessary is it a bad album. Absolutely not, but it's a good album. So there you have it. Caress of Steel. Good solid album. Maybe not as good as Fly By Night, but still plenty of good material to say, yeah, this is decent and one to definitely check out, I think. So there you have it. Caress of Steel. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 1976. And for me, this is one of the greatest Rush albums ever made. And it's beloved, and rightly so. And for me, this was the album that pretty much helped put Rush on the map. And this one is called 2112. So by this point, just like the name of their last tour, Rush were pretty much down the tubes, and they decided that, you know what, if we're going to go down, then we're going to go down fighting. Let's just make the album we want to make, and if no one likes it, too bad, but at least we tried. They certainly did more than that. 2112, an absolute masterpiece, and for me, the real game changer as far as their music was concerned. Fly By Night was a game changing moment in the sense that Neil Peart came on board, but for me, 2112 was not only the game changing moment, but the breakthrough album. That this was the band that had officially arrived after trying to find their footing and their identity, and Rush pretty much became what we would know now. But not quite there yet. But this was definitely an album that really put everyone on notice that we have arrived, and just like at the end of the title track, we have assumed control. Love it. So 2112 is a 20 plus minute epic made up of 6 movements. So we've got Overture, Temples of Syrinx, Discovery, Presentation, Oracle the Dream, Solioki, and Grand Finale. And then we've also got other tracks here, Passage to Bangkok, which is classic Rush, The Twilight Zone, Lessons, Tears, and Something for Nothing, which is just classic Rush as well. But this is an absolute masterpiece from start to finish, and some of Rush's best material as far as I'm concerned. This was really, really good. So let's have a look, shall we? And also, this marked the beginning of the robe era. You know, Rush with their robes. And there's Neil Peart with his classic handlebar moustache. Love it. And there's the Starman symbol, which would pretty much become Rush's iconic logo. And there is the lyrics as well, all written by Neil Peart. There's a couple that are written by Geddy and Alex. And one thing I have to say before we go forward, we've got to talk about Terry Brown. Terry Brown pretty much became Rush's producer for most of their history, or at least for the first half of their history. A great producer and really helped play a big part in their production. In many ways, you could kind of look at Terry Brown as the fourth member of Rush. You know, Rush and Terry Brown, it was just a match made in musical heaven. These guys worked so well together, and you know, Terry Brown was a big part of their iconic stuff. So we really got to give props to Terry Brown. He really made these guys sound really, really good. So mega props to him. But what an album 2112 is. An absolute classic. So standout tracks for me, 2112. It's not even a competition. None whatsoever. Passage to Bangkok and Something for Nothing and Tears, but it's a really good album. One of the greatest Rush albums ever made. And this would pretty much mark the end of the whole classic rock sound that Rush would have. And then they would go on to develop and morph into the Rush that we would all know. And just like I said before, and I'll say it again, Rush were just warming up. So there you have it, 2112, one of the greatest Rush albums ever made. Tremendous album. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 1977, and this one is called A Farewell to Kings. So 2112 was the band's breakthrough album that helped put them on the map and cement them as one of the top bands in the world. And it pretty much marked the beginning of Rush doing more longer, complex, epic pieces. And that trend would continue in A Farewell to Kings as the band would start to add more percussion to the mix, and we would see keyboards added and bass pedals. Now, the keyboards would go on to play a very big role in Rush's sound, as Geddy Lee would be playing bass, keyboards, bass pedals, and vocals, of course. And Alex Lifeson would add much more electric and acoustic guitars in his repertoire. And Neil Peart would also add more percussion to his drum kit. So you definitely saw the band evolving before our very eyes as they would just continue to grow and grow. And Rush were definitely on a real roll here. So let's have a look. So some iconic pictures there. A cool shot of the guys. And got the lyrics here as well. So as always, all of the music is written and composed by Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, and lyrics, of course, provided by Neil Peart. But a really good album here, and you definitely could see the wheels were turning for Rush. And wow, what a great album this is. So we kick things off in a much more calming fashion with the title track, A Farewell to Kings, with gorgeous acoustic guitar playing from Alex Lifeson, and we got some sounds of xylophone from Neil Peart and synth textual work from Geddy Lee, and pretty much like a precursor to what we would hear on another album, which we will get to in a moment, and then it just demolishes everything and goes into full hard rock mode. And you could hear Geddy Lee's voice really at an all-time high, and great opener here. And we got the 11-minute plus epic Xanadu, which for me is probably one of the greatest Rush songs ever written. And it's just such a build up. You got the sounds of synths, percussion, you got the keyboards, everything going on, and you got the guitar playing, the bass work, everything you want from Rush, it's all there and more. Then we got the lovely Closer to the Heart, which is just classic Rush. Cinderella Man, another great song as well. And then we got Mad Rigul, which is short but very sweet. And then we got the 10-minute plus epic Cygnus X1, Book 1, The Voyage. And very quietly leaves with the ominous words, to be continued, which obviously would carry on in the next album. But this is a really good album, one of Rush's absolute masterpieces, in my opinion. And I think it's just a tremendous album and a great follow-up to 2112. So standout tracks for me is A Farewell to Kings, Xanadu, Closer to the Heart, and Cygnus X1. But even some of the lesser known songs, it's really good. But those for me really stand out to me. And as I said, Rush were on a real roll, and the best part about it, they were just warming up. So there you have it. A Farewell to Kings. Excellent album, and one that I listen to a lot. It's a really good, strong album. And as I said, Rush were just kicking ass and blowing on all cylinders. So there you have it. A Farewell to Kings. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 1978, and this one is called Hemispheres. So Hemispheres pretty much picks up where A Farewell to Kings left off at the end of their last track, Cygnus X1, Book 1, The Voyage, and that trend pretty much carries on into Hemispheres. And this one could very well be my favourite Rush album from the 70s. The production is excellent, the playing, the musicianship is off the charts, the material is strong from start to finish. It's all top notch, and to me, it's an absolute classic. 2112 was the band's breakthrough album that helped put them on the map as one of the top bands. A Farewell to Kings was marking the start of transition where the band would start to add bass pedals, keyboards and more guitars and percussion into the mix. And Hemispheres pretty much takes those two albums and pretty much combines all of them into one big thing. And this is pretty much the end of, I would say, a trilogy, you know, and this will also mark the final album for the 70s. And this would also mark the end of Rush not making long form epic pieces, as they would opt to go in a much more different direction going forward into the next decade, which will be covered in part two of this special. But wow, what a way to close out the 70s. And Rush really do go out with a bang here. And there's only 4 tracks on this album, but they really pack a lot here. So we've got Cygnus X1 Book 2 Hemispheres, which is 18 minutes long and it's made up of 6 movements. So we've got Prelude, Apollo, Bringer of Wisdom, Dionysus, Bringer of Love, Armageddon, the Battle of Heart and Mind, Cygnus, Bringer of Balance, and the Sphere, a Kind of Dream. Tremendous stuff here. Then we got Circumstances, The Trees, which is classic Rush, and an instrumental, La Villa Strangiato, which is one of the top instrumentals from Rush, but it's a really good album here. So let's have a look. So we've got the brains floating around here. Yeah, I know that's a bit questionable there, but there's the guys. And there's the lyrics. But it's a really good album, and you could tell that this was going to be an album for the ages. You know, that opening for Preludes, like, dun, 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 dun. Okay, here we go. Rush are going out here, putting it all on the line, and wow, tremendous stuff here. And what an opener! 18 minutes of epicness. I love it. It's just got so many different things going on. It's got heaviness, it's got atmospheric, and it's just got everything you want. And I definitely would say that 2112, Cygnus X1, Book 1, The Voyage, and Cygnus X1, Book 2, Hemispheres, to me, are the most epic tracks that Rush have ever put together. Quite frankly, that in itself could be a monster album if you put those tracks together, because it really showed that Rush were not only versatile, but they could try different things and take risks and make it work. And they could really write epic pieces. And with Hemispheres, that was definitely no exception. So, standout tracks for me is Cygnus X1 Book 2 Hemispheres, Trees, and La Valla Streggiato. Circumstances is okay. It's not really a track I listen to often, but the rest of the album is just really good. But Circumstances has started to grow on me, but the rest of the album is just fantastic. I think Hemispheres was a great way to close out the 70s for Rush, and it's a really, really good album. So there you have it. Hemispheres, without a doubt, probably my all-time favourite Rush album from the 70s catalogue. So there you have it. Hemispheres. Tremendous. So, after discussing all of the Rush albums from the 70s, which one do I think is their best one? Well, Hemispheres is my all time favourite. It's the one I go to the most. But if I had to choose which Rush album I think is the best album from the 70s, it would easily be 2112, because this is the one that broke them, helped put them on the map, and pretty much gave them the big exposure and pretty much transformed them into the band that we would come to know. And the cover, the symbol, the music, everything about them would become synonymous with Rush. So I would definitely say 2112 is the band's best album, as far as the 70s is concerned. It's a classic album. The title track, Something for Nothing, Tears, Lessons, Twilight Zone, Passage to Bangkok. Every track on here is just boom, 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 boom. It's just a really good album. And it's more than just a strong album, it's an absolute classic. So I definitely, hands down, would go with 2112. That's the one that Rush became what we know, essentially. So there you have it, 2112. Excellent album, and for me, the band's best album from the 70s. One of the greatest Rush albums ever made. Love it. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Rush album from the 70s? Is it Rush, Fly By Night, Caress of Steel, 2112, A Farewell to Kings, or Hemispheres? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series, where I will return with part 2, where I'm going to be taking a look at Rush's albums from the 80s. So make sure you don't miss that. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.